I was saying, an attack on the physical body can be responded to on 3 levels. The first is related to processing this problem at the thalamus level. So tell me, Ignacio, what do you do when you prick your finger on a thorn, for example? I pull my finger away as fast as possible. Exactly. You don't run to ask your mom if you should take your finger off the thorn, do you? No. The thorn could have poison. That's right. When your sensory organs send the message to the brain that you've put your finger on a thorn, the message goes directly from them to the thalamic system, and from there to the frontal system, which is where decisions are made without being processed anywhere else. And this frontal system orders you to remove your finger from there as quickly as possible, fleeing from danger. Understood? I understand. No problem. However, a stimulus can also be processed at the limbic system level, which accesses stored information, feelings already experienced in similar situations, and controls emotions so you don't fall into despair. And at a higher level, by the frontal system, which, in collusion with the limbic system, seeks the best response. Furthermore, if necessary, the frontal system asks for help from other specialized sectors of the brain. Thus, we can say that it's the frontal system's job to make a rational analysis of what should be done and inhibit an emotional reaction if it's inappropriate, thereby preventing it from occurring again, while also forwarding the problem to other areas of the brain. Is that clear? Not at all. I could lie and say I understood everything and just go study the subject later. But I didn't understand anything, and even if I try to find the answers, I won't even know where to start researching. If Mr. João Francisco didn't understand, imagine me. Don't undervalue yourself like that. You're surprising me with your ability to comprehend. It is difficult for someone who does not have a basic notion of brain structures and subdivisions to know how the brain works. Let me think. Maybe I can explain it another way, perhaps from a more masculine perspective. Do you have an idea of how work is done in a company, a factory, or even a store where employees hold positions at varying levels, like assistant, supervisor, manager, for example? Yes. I worked for years in a furniture factory that had all of that. I myself reached the position of team coordinator, and I was once a worker at an outsourcing company that provides services to the factory on the other side of the river. From what you've told me, you already know what a supervisor's functions are within a company, so it'll be easy for you to understand what I'm going to say. In a very summarized way, we can say that the supervisor analyzes the service demands that come in, resolves them, or passes them on to other sectors so they can provide the solution. Isn't that right? Yes. Knowing this, let's think about the following. Imagine that in a factory like the one where Ignacio worked, and that I visited, the need for a service is detected by an electrician in a particular sector. Do you think this electrician can pass the problem directly to the supervisor without first calling the area supervisor? I think so. If it's a vital sector, by the time he goes looking for a supervisor who might be doing another job, the damage could increase. Everything could catch fire. In these cases, what can the supervisor do? Run out to solve the problem himself? Of course not, unless he doesn't trust his subordinates. Or unless he's a monopolizing type of supervisor who wants to keep everything in his own hands. And what attitude do you think would be most correct? Tell the electrician to turn off the circuit breaker to solve the problem as quickly as possible before a greater loss occurs. Going back to the thorn example, upon feeling the prick on your finger, the frontal lobe, which is the supervisor, orders the specific muscle groups to remove the finger from the thorn to avoid a greater danger. I'm starting to understand this part. Now, let's imagine that once the danger has been averted, sometime later the sector supervisor is called, becomes aware of what happened, and learns that the problem wasn't solved just by turning off the circuit breaker, for example. It's his job to find out what's going on, since it's his function to regulate everything so it works properly, and filter the jobs before taking them to the main supervisor. What does he do? I think he'll try to solve the problem himself. Exactly. There, he'll use all his knowledge and experience to solve the problem. Upon receiving the information that such and such sector is having problems and that it didn't help for the electrician to just turn off the circuit breaker, he'll search his memory to see if that's ever happened before, there or in other sectors. If he remembers it's happened before, he repeats the procedure that worked that time. If he concludes that problem had never happened before, he'll try to identify something similar that he's seen before, or even read in a book, and relate it to what's occurring. The main supervisor, who has already been informed that the problem wasn't solved, stays alert but calm, since he has a foreman taking care of the problem and leaves everything in his hands without further worry. Once the problem is corrected, the foreman returns to his office. Any questions? No? Okay. Imagine this. A supervisor gets a call about a problem. He fixes it and goes back to his office. But then, 15 minutes later, the phone rings again. He rushes to answer it, his heart pounding a little. He's worried it's the same problem, maybe something bigger than he thought. The first time the phone rang, it was just a sound. But this time, he's already anxious. That ring now has an emotional meaning attached to it. It's like when someone calls you to argue about something you did, and you had no idea you'd even upset them. The second time that person calls, you're already bracing for impact. Exactly. There's a feeling, an emotion that pops up as soon as the call comes through. So let's say the supervisor realizes the problem is beyond his control. What's the next logical step? He takes it to his own boss, the manager, and they work together to find a solution. Correct. The manager might exchange information with other departments to find the best and quickest fix. If their actions are correct, the job's done, and everyone moves on. The data they used gets filed away by the manager, ready for future reference if a similar issue occurs. But what if they still can't solve it? Then the supervisor needs to bring in specialists from different levels and sectors. Maybe an electrical engineer, or he might check with other parts of the factory. Is another department accidentally causing an overload on the power system, for example? I can see you visualizing the factory, but you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with my wife's cousin's brain? Don't rush. You'll understand in a moment. I want you to first grasp that the frontal cortex, the area often affected in conditions like schizophrenia, has the same role in the brain as a supervisor has in a factory. Once you understand that, it'll be much easier to understand what's happening. Okay, I see the light bulb going on. We can say, in a very simplified way, that the thalamus in our brain is like the factory manager. Its job is to filter information and handle minor issues before they even reach the supervisor. And who plays the role of the supervisor? The frontal lobes. By filtering things out, the manager prevents the supervisor from getting overloaded. I think even I'm starting to get it. So, in conclusion, the frontal system, our supervisor, gets information from the thalamus. It gets an initial overview based on past experiences, previous attempts to solve similar problems, and even the feelings associated with those past events, which come from the limbic system. Then, it decides what to do, plans the action, and later judges if the action was correct. If the problem persists, it consults the other lobes, the parietal, temporal, and occipital, to see if the issue is originating somewhere else, before deciding on the next step. Okay, I get the concept, but I have no idea where these frontal lobes and other strange named parts are. If I ever learned this, I forgot. Or maybe I'm just dumb. Don't worry. Forgetting this stuff doesn't mean you lack intelligence. After all, you don't need to know brain anatomy to be a great carpenter. I can send you a diagram of the brain later so you can visualize it better. For now, the most important thing is to understand the role of the frontal lobes in schizophrenia. To do that, let's go back to our factory supervisor. Imagine this supervisor is having a bad day. He's tired, argued with his wife, he's feeling depressed, sick, or maybe he's on medication that makes him groggy. He just didn't sleep well. Any situation that impairs his performance. What's going to happen? He won't be able to do his job with the necessary speed and accuracy. The work either won't get done or it'll be done poorly. He might give the wrong order to the electrician and then just ignore the manager's follow-up calls. He might put it off thinking it's not urgent, or he might mess up trying to solve it all by himself. So many things could go wrong. And isn't that what's happening with your wife's cousin? Yes. Now I can visualize all those situations. So, from what you're saying, her frontal lobes aren't integrating properly with the rest of her brain. Is that it? That's right. They're not managing to understand the information coming in, analyze what's happening, take action, or communicate effectively with other brain areas. With schizophrenia, we can say the problem isn't a lack of electrical energy, but an excess of it. Remember that fuel additive we talked about? It's like a neurochemical hyperfunction in the frontal lobe, caused by an excess of a chemical called dopamine. What happens in her head is the same as what would happen in a disorganized factory where the supervisor isn't doing his job right. If we understand what happens in that chaotic sector, we can start to understand what's happening in her brain. One very important thing to realize is that the fault may not lie solely with the supervisor, or the frontal lobes. We can imagine a scenario where problems arrive directly at the supervisor without being pre-screened by the manager, the thalamus. If the thalamus isn't doing its job right, it lets every little issue pass through without any filter, completely overloading the supervisor. Or it could be the opposite. The thalamus might be one of those managers who tries to handle everything, doesn't know how to delegate, and gets overloaded himself while the supervisor has nothing to do. On the other hand, we can also suppose it's the supervisor who is incapacitated by that excess dopamine, and because of that, gets flustered by having too many things to do. So, why is there an excess of dopamine in the brain? To explain that, I'd need to prepare a much more complex lesson. There are several different dopamine pathways in the brain, and just blaming the thalamus isn't the full picture. I only use this analogy so you could understand the fundamental role of the frontal lobes in schizophrenia. In this condition, on top of this frontal dysfunction, we often see a state of progressive and intense stress, plus other external factors. Just like a factory isn't just an electrician, a manager, and a supervisor, the brain isn't just the thalamus, memory, and lobes. It's much more complicated. And tied into all of this, we have the role of family, school, society, genetics, and the individual's own spiritual evolution. That's why it's so necessary to combine emotional and spiritual care with medication. If this explanation was helpful, please give us a like and follow for more content.